Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Meet a Scientist live stream. I'm coming at you live from the Youth BioLab at the Albrechtsen Research Centre at St. Boniface Hospital in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We are on Treaty 1 territory, which is the land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples. In this weekly live stream, we get to have conversations with people from all around the research center. So we learn a little bit more about the work that goes on here, but more importantly, we get to learn more about the people who do that work and why they love what they do. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well. So if you have any questions, you can join us there too. So this week, our guest is Teri Moffatt. She is an award-winning research technician in Dr. Todd Duhamel's Physical Activity and Chronic Disease Prevention Lab. So that's part of our Institute of Cardiovascular Sciences here at the Albrechtsen Research Centre. Welcome, Teri. Thank you for joining us. I'll end my share so we can actually see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Anytime. So you've worked as a research technician kind of like all over in a wide range of health sciences, from studying things like West Nile virus transmission in mosquitoes to working in cancer research. And right now you're studying exercise in your lab. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role that technicians play in a research lab?
Sure. Basically, it varies from anything from being a junior technician to when you first start, you're making solutions and doing sort of day-to-day stuff to support the students and the postdocs and the research associates in the lab. And
so you're like mixing up the chemicals, following the recipes.
Yeah, you're just kind of a support system when you first start, and often as you gain experience and knowledge, you become an integral part of the lab, and you do your own research projects. You still are supporting students and everybody else that works in the lab, but I have my own research projects that I work on as well. So as long as well. So yeah.
So as you become more of like a senior technician and you've gained all this experience, you just get to start running your own projects based on all of the knowledge that you've gained?
Yeah. Your principal investigator, is the person your boss.
Our bosses at research.
Yeah, he plans the projects usually for you with your input on ideas and stuff and how you think it could be run better, or if things don't work, you problem solve together and figure out how to get things going in the direction you want them to go. So
okay, so like a principal investigator or the professor decides, like, I have this idea about the things we want to study based on the health needs in the community, and then they're like, this is what I want, make it happen. Is that exactly. And that's your job then, to make it happen?
To support having that happen. Yes, exactly. So students also have like mini projects that they're doing. They take, if they're a master's student, they're here for about 2 years. If they're a PhD student, they're here for about 4 years. So, they have little mini projects, and a technician often is in the lab for, is the kind of long-term person in the lab. So they end up knowing most of the research. They teach students as well. So it's a great job. Actually, I've been working at St. Boniface for about 20 years now. I took a small break after I had my second child and went to University of Manitoba and worked in a lab there on West Nile virus. And then I missed home, so I came back to St. Boniface Research Centre. So
yeah, it's pretty nice around here. Yeah. So what did you study when you went to university? Did you always kind of know that you wanted to work in science, or what was that path like?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to work in science. When I went to university, I kind of loved everything. So I took a biochemistry 4-year biochem degree. That way I could study biology and chemistry, a little bit of everything. And then when I graduated, I was trying to think about whether I should do my master's degree, and I thought, well, maybe I should go work in a lab. And I had an opportunity to come to St. Boniface Research in my first as a junior tech. And the lab I was working in did multiple sclerosis research and Alzheimer's research. And I fell in love with research, and I love being a technician. I love the part of my job I love the most probably is when things don't work. I like to MacGyver things. I like to figure out how we can adapt what's here to work for what we need. And then, you know, obviously it's nice when experiments work the first time and you get data, but that doesn't always happen. So, you know, what can you tweak? What could have gone wrong so that you can make things work. So,
yeah, I think that's a thing that a lot of people imagine about experimental design is you like plan out this experiment and you have your hypothesis that you think like this is going to happen because I've done this in these certain tests. And then, but like the majority of the time, the thing that you think is going to happen doesn't happen. So a lot of our work as like technicians or research scientists is figuring out, well, why didn't it happen or what's actually going on here?
Yeah. There's a lot of variables to control. So, you know, as you gain experience, you learn quickly, you know, how to keep the controls accurate. And that helps a lot too. So,
yeah, that's an interesting thing in your lab in particular too, because, you know, when we're studying concepts about human health, part of the experiment design is if we want to work with cells in a dish or something, then we have to mimic pretty accurately the conditions in a body between a healthy or a sick condition. But in a person, there are so many variables. And then even in between different people in a population, there's an even wider range of variables. So I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about how your lab does that work, because you study both in people and then in cell culture. So how do you approach the study of physical activity and its effects on our health?
Right. Well, we actually have a lot of cool techniques. For instance, the cells in your heart, the cardiomyocytes, we can isolate those from rats. We can grow them in a dish, and we actually have a machine that basically adds voltage, special dishes to add voltage, and we can actually make those cells mimic exercise. So they basically exercise in the dish. So you can give them different kinds of exercise or not exercise. And then we collect those cells and we can look at the genes that are upregulated or downregulated and which proteins are being made or not being made. So that's pretty cool.
If we back out there, so you're saying you can take muscles out of a body. You can
cells
keep them,
cells of the muscles. Yeah.
The muscle cells. Sorry. Thank you for that clarification. So you take the muscle cells out, and if we're exercising, that electric zap is a message coming originally from our nervous system, right? If it's voluntary muscle, so there's an initial zap, but then muscle cells also can pass that electric zap on, correct?
Correct.
That's how it works in us. So then you're turning that natural process into a machine that zaps. So how would you change that setup, or what's the difference between me, you know, like sprinting versus me walking for an hour? Like how do those things change?
So we can, the setup would be you either can do sort of a lot of exercise or slow exercise over a long period of time just to mimic like a heart beating, and we can up the voltage so that it's more simulating an exercise.
Meaning like a more intense contraction?
Or they just go faster. So when you're exercising, your heart has to beat faster to pump blood to your body. So we just exercise the little cells to mimic the exercise that you were doing. I mean, it could go, we don't generally do this. The cells, unfortunately, don't live in culture forever, but because cells don't live long enough to do long-term studies, then we can move it to a mouse model. And we have cages that have wheels for mice to run, and we monitor how much they're running. Or we actually have a treadmill that's a little tiny treadmill for mice, and you can put the mice right on the treadmill, and then you can monitor how much exercise. You can give them an hour of exercise or half an hour exercise, and then we also alter diet to go along with that. So we can give our mice a normal sort of mouse diet, or we give them a high fat, high sucrose diet, which we call the McDonald's diet. And we see how that affects the mice. And we do know, and we've seen, and Todd's published, Todd Duhamel, my boss, has published papers that show that mice that are low fat and exercising obviously have the best sort of physiology. This one gene specifically we look at is SERCA2A, and we know that that's SERCA2A. So it's a calcium regulator. We know that people who are healthy have a certain level of SERCA, so we kind of use that as the normal. And mice that eat a low-fat diet, we use that as our normal. If they exercise, their SERCA expression goes up. If they eat a high-fat diet, their SERCA expression goes down. But then if they exercise along with eating the high-fat, high sucrose diet, then their SERCA is much better. So we know that, if you're going to eat McDonald's, you should also exercise.
Okay, so there is a balance out there. Like if we want to binge on food that's so tasty, then we can balance it out a little bit at the genetic level by exercising.
Yeah. So moderation, obviously nobody's perfect all the time, but if you want to indulge in things that maybe aren't the best for you, as long as you're being active and exercising as well, then
a friend of mine has a great quote. She always says, everything in moderation, especially moderation. So, you get and she's a Chinese medicine doctor, so she gives the go ahead that like, definitely there's no shame in enjoying these things when you have them, everything in moderation, but it's kind of the whole picture. So if you're going to be indulging in those tasty things, we can go out and exercise a little bit more. We've got a good question in the chat, and I was wondering a similar thing. So if you have this model where you put these mice on a little mouse treadmill and they have to run, and you want to change the amount that they're running for, or you want to show high exercise, how do you convince the mice that they need to run for an hour? Like, don't they refuse or get lazy, or do they just really love running when they have the opportunity?
Normal mice like to run. We we monitor them in their cages. If they have a wheel, they run on it. People who have hamsters at home or whatever, you see them running on their wheels. So that's normal behavior for the mice. Okay. We put them on a treadmill. They're kind of in a lane, and at the back of the lane, we put a little sponge that they don't like touching their tail.
So there's some encouragement that they should be escaping the sponge touch.
We've had lazy mice. That's certainly, mice that didn't want to run, and they would try to, hide in your lab coat pocket, and, we'd have to encourage them to go back on the treadmill. But we know that it doesn't hurt them to run. Yeah. Obviously, if they are on the high fat, high sucrose diet, they do gain more weight, and that makes them less eager to run. So, those ones tend to need a little more encouragement. So,
but, interesting. Yeah. Similarly, I feel like there's probably an interplay between what we're eating and our interest in exercising. Like if I'm eating a ton of really high sugar, high fat foods, I'm probably also feeling more tired or stressed or something.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the time that I'm going to set aside an hour to do my like weightlifting. I don't do weightlifting, but like go for a run or something like that. So it's interesting how those things connect. Exactly. So we've talked a little bit before too about how you translate those studies into a human model. Also, we can't like force people necessarily to be running on a treadmill, but part of your lab's work is really to use exercise to create better health outcomes as we age. So can you talk a little bit about those studies in people and what you're learning and how you've designed the study?
Exactly. So Todd's part of his research is clinical research as well. So we have in the past done a study, and we're currently in another clinical study called Warm Hearts. It targets women who are 55 and older. And what we're looking for is they come in and they fill out some questionnaires, and they do some simple exercise tests, and they do a blood pressure response to exercise. They do a 6-minute walk test. They do a grip strength test. And
so
what we're looking,
all of those tests at the beginning, those are like your indicator of, is somebody already at their optimal fitness or health, or something? Like how hard I can squeeze is an indicator of my overall health. What if I have really strong legs but weak hands?
Then that would show up in your walk tests. Like if you were,
so it's a holistic measurement.
Exactly. So they're just kind of simple tests. Now there are like complicated things that you can do to test these things, but the thing we're looking for is to find early markers of cardiovascular disease. So, we can look at simple things that could be done in a doctor's office, for instance, because not everybody wants to come to a hospital clinic and get, invasive tests done. These are simple tests that really require very little equipment. And you could do them at your regular physical at your doctor's office. And if we can figure out if there's some early signs or early markers of cardiovascular disease, and we could tell people early whether they have a greater chance of having cardiovascular disease as they age, or then you can make some lifestyle changes, or you can get on medications earlier if once they do further testing and determine that that's true. So
can we kind of rewind for a moment and talk about why it's important that this study focuses on women's heart health?
Sure. So not surprisingly, we all hear about heart attacks in men and that, crushing chest pain that they have that sends them to the emergency room. And for decades, they really didn't focus on women's heart health because often estrogen protects women until menopause.
Oh, interesting. And that's why your target group is 50 plus?
Yeah. So, and now they've determined over the last decade or a bit more that women do have heart issues, and they present with the classical heart attack differently. And often that they're ignored or they're sent home because it seems like they have indigestion or they're having a panic attack or stress related symptoms, when it truly is a heart attack. And women die or in the past have died because they've been sent home.
Yeah, I think the current stats are still, like, for sure cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer globally, but particularly for women, I think like more women die from heart disease than from breast cancer. And there's a whole lot of awareness about breast cancer and fundraising for that. But there is this huge problem in not just in hospitals, but also in the medical research system, where a lot of our studies are also done on like male or like XY cells or animals. So we have a harder time understanding how biology is different between biological sexes.
And the reason that they've done studies on XY or male animals in the past is just because of hormones in females complicate things. So it takes a little bit more ingenuity. It takes a little bit more planning or they thought it did in the past for to have female included in studies. But I think the new trend is that there is definitely a lot of people and a lot of things being done for women's heart health now. So it's positive. And we've had great response to our study. It's on pause right now, obviously, because of COVID, but we've had 1,300 women from Winnipeg area that have come in. We have the St. Anne's walking group for instance, one lady came in and she told all her friends. So we have all these women from St. Anne's that came in, and we give them a little bit of information about, their own health. They get to sort of see their risk of having heart disease. And we know several people have called back and said that, they've lost some weight or they've become more active just because of the study. So, and, it gets the word out about that women do have to take care of their own heart health. So
do you think that like finding out about their own status as far as heart health goes, like their own risk potential, does that cause a change in behavior? Because I feel like people go to the doctor's office for their checkups all the time, and doctors are always like, are you eating healthy? Are you smoking? Are you doing these things? Because we've known for a long time. But is that hearing about their own risk assessment the thing that people need to say, okay, well, I've got to either make these changes or okay, I'm on the right track?
Yeah, I feel like it does. I mean, we've also recently added pregnancy history to our questionnaires, and that wasn't done in the past. And for me, that's a personal thing, because I had preeclampsia when I was pregnant. I had high blood pressure, and my daughter was born prematurely at 1 pound 11 ounces. And we were lucky. Both of us are fine. We got good health care at St. Boniface Hospital here. So, I was able to walk through the tunnel and go and visit her when she was in the the NICU for 2 weeks or 2 months, sorry.
Wow.
So, yeah. And because of that, I now know that I have a higher risk of having cardiovascular disease because I had this pregnancy with this complication. So, I've made my own lifestyle changes that I hope in the future will mean that I have a healthier heart, so I can be around longer. So
interesting. Yeah, there's such a diversity of, genetics. Everyone is so different, and some of the newer things that we start hearing about are like personalized medicine. So figuring out like what drugs work best with your genetics, or like what are the early signs that I might have problems in the future. So you say, so preeclampsia, high blood pressure during pregnancy. And I think you talked about gestational diabetes also as another one. So
if you have gestational diabetes, they now know that means you'll have a higher risk of having type 2 diabetes as you age. So, people should be aware, and not everybody basically pregnancy is a stress test for your body. And, so not everybody has that information early. So if we can do tests like Todd's designed in a clinic, then, if people have a higher risk, then we'll be able to determine that. So
that's great. It seems like for so many diseases, early detection or awareness of risk is one of the best ways of preventing those problems.
Exactly.
In the long run.
And people have genetic histories. If your parents have had type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease, or your grandparents, obviously we have to take into consideration the time of, where they live.
Everyone in that generation smoked.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I personally, I have several people in my grandparents' generation and even like my parents' generation who have heart disease problems. But then when I look back at their lives, I'm like, oh, they all smoked for a significant portion of their life. So it's hard to parse out, what my actual risks are, but it's always good to be aware of those things.
Yeah. So, first of all, don't smoke. That's pretty much the general rule these days.
It's so popular though.
Yeah. I highly recommend not doing that, but
good recommendation.
Yeah. But other than that, the moderation thing for sure is important. Being active. I know I volunteer with my kids' sports and my community center, because I know from my research that physical activity is important, and certainly for getting youth involved and kids involved in sports and in activities earlier in their life, they are, develop pathways and physiology and mental health as well is affected by exercise. So, we want to raise a healthy generation. So that's a personal mission of mine, to get people involved early. And then, as you age, you develop the habit of exercising and being sport. So then it's easier as an adult, because I think it is challenging, to start exercising as an older person. And, one of the things that we're doing in the lab is to look for the pathways. Like, why do these genes go up? Why did they go down? And if we can, figure out the pathway of physical activity and the exercise, then, there's more chance that we can, maybe even develop a drug for people who can't exercise because they're elderly or they have physical disabilities that means they can't exercise. So, it's very important. We know that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the ideal is to be able to go out and do these things physically, but that is a good point that like a lot of our drug target development is for those situations where that's not possible, or that's not enough of an intervention at that time. So maybe we need to look at drug targets for it. I know I personally, like, those habits that we develop young of like playing sports and whatnot, that definitely makes it easier to start doing things as an adult. I personally have found it really hard transitioning from exercising through sport to now in COVID, I have to decide, like, do I need to start lifting weights, or like, I'll go for a run or walks with my dog and do yoga, but like, is that really enough? Or do I have to totally change over and start doing independent workouts, which I hate. I would much rather like play hockey than, do like arm curls or something. But
Right.
if the biological need is there, then maybe we've got to figure out a different strategy.
Right. Well, and I think it differs for everybody, right? But certainly even just standing up from your computer, or, going for a walk, or anything that just gets you some activity, gets your blood moving, gets your heart beating a little faster. So yeah.
Awesome.
Doing some squats while you're doing Zoom meetings.
Oh yeah, I could do that. I have one of those bouncy exercise balls too, so maybe I need to put that into play a bit more. We've got a few questions in the chat more related to, working as a technician within a lab that I want to get to before I have to let you go. So one of them is sort of, out of all of the projects that you've worked on, and like you've told me about way more than the stuff that I kind of introduced you as, because you worked in quite a few different labs, but what were some of the favorite projects that you had the opportunity to work on?
The interesting thing about being a technician, or science in general, I guess, is that the techniques are transferable, right? So whatever I learned in my first lab, I can take to my second lab, third lab. The interesting things, not necessarily my favorite, when I worked in West Nile, we actually had mosquitoes. We were working on mosquitoes and knocking down their reproduction. So we actually had mosquitoes in the lab, and we were, so, on Fridays, it was the students' job to pick the pupae out of the tanks of mosquitoes.
That's the baby mosquitoes, right?
The baby mosquitoes.
They're not yet full flying around mosquitoes. They're hatched and
they're supposed to put them into like cages that are contained, and of course somebody would forget on Friday, and you'd open the incubator Monday morning and a million mosquitoes would fly out, and students would panic and you can't kill those are our special mosquitoes. So you're sitting in the lab doing work all day getting eaten alive. So that was
not mosquitoes that were carrying West Nile, right?
No, none of them were we didn't have actually any West Nile virus in the lab. They were just trying to use, basically they're trying to sterilize the males so that they couldn't breed.
Interesting.
Because the mosquitoes are an important part of the ecosystem. So you can't necessarily kill all the mosquitoes, because then lots of other things are affected. So, but if you can sterilize males so that the females think they're breeding, but they're not, so it's competitive inhibition essentially, then they're just not breeding.
So you're just lowering the population a bit.
Yeah.
We all know mosquitoes have found ways to survive despite all of our efforts. So they're doing okay out there, pollinating the things they need to.
Exactly. So that was fun. I really like working, running, having little mice on treadmills is fun.
Yeah, that sounds
yeah, I really like working in physical activity. and chronic disease. But I'm actually I've also been working in Mike Czubryt's lab and learning about a new gene called scleraxis, and that's important in cardiovascular disease as well, and also in wound healing. So that's pretty new to me. I'm just in the learning phase of that, but I'm able to take my techniques there as well, and I'm working there part-time because Todd's stuff is on hold right now because of COVID. So so it's fun. It's fun to learn new things even as an old dog. And so
on the flip side of that, another question from our chat is, what's one of the biggest challenges of working as a lab technician?
Probably the biggest challenge was what I said was actually the thing that I liked most, is it can get frustrating when things don't work. And if you don't like problem solving and you don't find that a challenge, it can be difficult for people. So sometimes, it feels like there's a full moon and nothing is working for, or we find out that the water that we use, like we have special water, we found out that there was mold or something growing in that machine. So, nothing worked for a month because basically the water we were using wasn't clean. So, those kind of little challenges, but, overall it's a really good life balance. When we were working from home for COVID, that isn't what I like. I like being active in the lab. I like using my hands and
doing stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very hands-on. It's very active. You're up and down, doing work all day. You're not just sitting at a computer. So I love that. You're doing different techniques. I get to plan my own schedule. So, some days are really busy, some days are less busy. And so, it's a job I love anyways, but.
Yeah, that sounds very flexible, and transferable skills means kind of if you need a change of scenery or, you're done studying scleraxis after 10 years with Mike's lab, then maybe you can move on and study something different and use all of those same skills.
Exactly.
So one last question that I'll ask before we head out is, so what advice would you give to somebody who's interested in becoming a lab tech? Now, obviously, people applying into this now might be different than the circumstances when you were exiting university, but what's some advice that you could give?
Well, most PIs take summer students. So if you're in a science, taking a science degree, you can apply to work as a summer student, and you can come for a couple months and get a feel for the lab. And most labs will teach you, all the techniques that they're doing, or some of all the techniques that they're doing. So you get a little idea of how a lab runs, what you'd be doing when you were working there. That's probably the best way to get an idea, to do what I did, which was like kind of bail out of school and just come try it. May or may not work for everyone, but obviously you have to know you love science. You have to be the person in your classes that, takes over the dissections, which was me. And interestingly enough, my biology lab partner is now my sister-in-law. And we laugh about the fact that she's a doctor and I wouldn't let her do anything in our labs because I wanted to do it. And so you have to be I would say that you have to be the person that really likes to do the labs. Yeah. And you also have to be a good baker. That's my,
a good maker?
A baker.
Baker. Oh, like following recipes or protocols. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so if you like to bake and you can make a recipe where a cookie comes out at the end, or a cake that looks good, then I think you could be a good technician. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to switch back to our title screen. But thank you so much for joining us, Teri, today for our Meet a Scientist series. Viewers, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates and check us out at youthbiolab.ca or follow at youthbiolab on Twitter and Instagram if you want to keep up to date. Thanks for watching, everyone, and stay curious.
I think my